Hi, everyone. This is Janet Lynn Kraft with another episode of the Living Room Talks. I have one of my really good friends with me today. Chris, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Chris Blocker. I've been a certified athletic trainer since 2015. I'm originally born and raised in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Jen and I, we worked together for 5.5 years at LaGrange College, and I'm currently working as what we call an on-site medical representative slash athletic trainer over here at Amazon here in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
So let's jump right in. You make a big change from the collegiate setting to industrial, and you moved back home. So tell me
Yeah.
a little bit about the decision making to move back home.
Yes, it's something that my wife and I we flirted with for about I'd say like a year and a half. We were thinking about it because with the college lifestyle, with all the traveling and time away from home, and just not always being present for the stuff that I always like to do. And so the big change came for two reasons. One was the decisions I told you about there, and the other one was just getting all into it. My family, particularly my mother, she's a caregiver for a couple of my relatives who are going through onset dementia, and she was really struggling to take care of them. And so I really was having a hard time, except for trying to help her way back in Georgia. And so that kind of helped spur the way to me trying to make the decision to go back. So it was a big family decision to make that change. And it wasn't an easy one. We prayed about it for about a week, talked to people that I trusted and cared about, friends and mentors, of course, my mom. And after getting everybody's support and decision, and I let the cat out the bag a couple weeks before school got out, I felt comfortable with the decision. So it was a big one. Still adjusting to it, but I feel like I made the right one.
So, what has been the biggest adjustment from the collegiate setting to the industrial setting?
Pros, I have a very good work-life balance. So my current schedule, I have what's called a donut schedule where I work Mondays and Tuesdays from 7 to 5:30, so a 10-hour shift, and then I work Thursday and Friday the same thing. So I have my Wednesdays and my weekends. So it's nice being able to be home before 6 and having a pretty much a good lifestyle like that, and I can see my wife and my wife anytime I have. So that's been great. The company, they actually do value AT, so I was actually specifically hired because of my experience as a letter trainer, because with position I have, they hire people from EMTs, people like ATs and stuff like that, whoever have some type of first aid or combat or medical experience, especially in orthopedics on my side. So that's been a good part. One of the cons is, and it's something my friend who helped me get a job warned me about, is that I have to take 90% of the training I have and condense it into 10 because we're working under OSHA guidelines. So I really have to operate as a first responder. So there's no treatments I'm giving out. There's none of that rehab I can do. It's a lot of super concise, strict rehab, not even rehabs really. It's what they call treatments that I can do. And it's a very limited scope. So I have to learn to be a lot less hands off, do a lot less advice that I give to people, and just understanding that with the general demographic, they're not as passionate about getting better. They're just trying to get there to work. So some people really take care of themselves. Others like, look, I'm just trying to get that check and just get out of here. So I have to find new ways to be impactful with this new demographic. So that's been one of the biggest adjustments that I'm still making.
Other than treatments and operating under OSHA rules, what type of administration organization things have you had to learn or adjust?
So specifically with Amazon is that they're really big on numbers. So everything has a metric that we do. So like for example, one of the things that we have to do now is they track and see how many times I go out into the what we call the floor, which is the work site, to actually interact with the I don't want to say patients anymore, the associates. So I have to go out there and actually explain, like we do, educate the masses about what we do. And there's a certain thing that I put in to say, okay, I interact with this person, use a login, like what the site they have, and explain what they did. And they literally will keep track of how often I go out there, how many times they come through, things like that. So understanding that everything has to be justified with a number per se. So that could be good because, like, for example, they're really great to promote people if they see the actual work that you put in. So like for us, if they see you put in 10.5 hour day, you're traveling, you have X amount of people go through, and they see that, they'll quickly give you the reward for that. So that's great. But one bad side about it is that because everything has a metric, they're quick to call you out on it. So if I don't get something in on time for whatever, they're quick to what they call escalate it to the higher ups. And so it can work for and against you. So just understanding that like I said, everything has a number, and they will either call you out for it in a good way or call you out for it in a bad way. So it's like what they always tell me, try to make it work the best for you. So that's really that right there. Everything has a cadence, so there's a time and an order where if this happens here, there's always a set way I go about it with that. And so there's not a lot of gray area really to deviate from that. Is like that's something that I have to learn. Is I can't get too creative because it's a certain specific guideline I have to go to. So I kind of have to put my creativity into a box where I have to fit a certain mold. So that's been one of the other big challenges is that I got to put my creativity away, which I knew that was going to happen, but I got to understand what I'm dealing with.
So thus far, I know you haven't been on the job that long, but what has been the biggest surprise to you?
um, I would say one of the biggest surprises there is that two things. One is that despite the fact that I'm used to doing things a certain kind of way, is that I never thought going to a company like this they would value what I bring to the table so much because I thought I'd have to explain what I have to do. So, like for example, half my coworkers they're EMTs or combat medics, and so anybody who has a severe bleed or things like that, they're obviously the experts in that realm. But 9 times out of 10, if somebody comes to orthopedic thing, they're quickly turning my way. Say, all right, what can we do for this person? Can you tape this person? What kind of treatment should we do? And I just would think they would just try to jump into it. And even my supervisor, he's also say this is specifically why we brought you in for that. So seeing that what I brought to the table and exactly what I brought, that was very surprising for me. Another thing is that even though I'm not really dealing with a college athletic life, it's still the same way I would treat an athlete. It's just really showing how much I would care for the person and just knowing that off the jump, and they'll be more compliant with it. And that's something that I'm still being myself for what I do. Is just I'm expressing it in a different way. Is if that makes sense. It's really the same cat, you're just skinning it a different way, is where my mom would put it. And so I've always appreciated that advice getting there is that I'm just changing who I work with in the populace. And another thing is that they really do reward the good work that you do. So that was another thing that I was a little surprised with. Like I don't have to be in my position for a certain amount of time to actually move up versus an AT world. It can be pretty lateral, where it's mostly lateral moves, not really big vertical moves. They're quick to try to move you up that way. So that was another thing that was a little surprising for myself too. I was thinking I had to be in my position for like 2 to 3 years. It's like, no, if you've done it for 6 months and you're good at it, they'll move you up if you need to. I said, oh, really? I was like, I could do that if I wanted to. So those are a couple of things that have jumped out to me that have been in a positive way, pretty surprising.
So you mentioned before you make this decision, you consulted not only family, but mentors within the profession. Speak about how did you find your mentors and what were you looking for when you were looking for mentors?
Um, and I'll say that's a great question. So the biggest thing I liked in having a mentor was, and from having Rob as one of ours, is having somebody that genuinely not only has your best interests at heart, but somebody that you don't always have to talk to because you need something. So with the people that I shared it with, I knew they would have really relative experience of what I would look for in the answers I would have. And so I just really just laid it out to them just as if I was talking to like either yourself or one of my parents and say, hey, can I talk to you for a bit? And this was just kind of lay it down as like, if your past experience in this certain thing, like how did you lay it out? Am I kind of looking at it a certain way? And if I wasn't looking at it right, they could just tell it to me straight. It's like one good example is one of my good mentors, Carlos Evers, who I call Uncle Los affectionately. He's that straight shooter uncle. Is like if I'm not in the role, he's like, listen, nephew, like you are totally off the rad with that and stuff, and just like that's what I need. He's that straight shooter one that I have. Another one is Larry Bell, who's like my big brother. He's like an older version of me, and so we kind of think similar. So he would kind of see where I would go with, it, and I like talking to him about it from that perspective, especially from a psychological standpoint. Because that's his background. Rob, because I've known him for so long, so he was just going back and forth, especially from a leadership standpoint. It's like, how would you feel to use in this standpoint? And another one is Regina Parquet from App State, because she, especially here being in North Carolina, having a female perspective. And so I kind of explained it from my wife's point of view. And luckily, she had a chance to meet her when she was in New Orleans. So it was a good reference point. So having people from different backgrounds and lifestyles to see how they would take whatever decision or anything I'd ask for it. So I have kind of 4 different outtakes, but not kind of getting the same type of answer. So I may have to look one way for this one and maybe for this one, so I don't get the same kind of answer. So I kind of look for variety and different types of experience. But at the end of the day, is if I know they have my best interests at heart, and I know I could come to them for anything, even if it's just checking on them, because not all the time the mentee checks on the mentor, and I've always appreciated about them too. So those are really what I look for in them, and they have been great to me so far.
So the four people that you mentioned, how did you find them and were you looking for something specific in a mentor?
Straight up plug, the think tank was a huge one for this one. So Rob, because we worked from directly, and he was already somebody I was looking for in the beginning, so that was a real easy one right there. The other two, particularly Carlos and Larry, so he referenced me to them because him and Larry went to the same school at Valdosta State, so they knew each other from there, and he felt where personalities mesh, and so I reached out to him through GroupMe, and we hit it off there. We've been talking for about 2.5, 3 years, and that's been great. Carlos, because they've known each other for years, and he mentioned the top ego, especially him being a little bit more experienced with him. I think he's almost 40 years in the game, and so that was another when it came out to there, and just how we described it. Said, look, he quickly came out and talked to me, so I talked to him like he's like Uncle Snoop. So I was like, he's my Uncle Snoop, he's Uncle Lowe. So he just the straight shooter, exactly what I would need from a person. I love that about him. And then Regina, that one was I think it was Avion that referenced me to her and just like, hey, you're from North Carolina. There's a person here from App State at the time. And so having a North Carolina connection right there, and just also having a good female perspective like that. And so I kind of was looking for three different types, well, really four in this case, and just knowing that I have any types of my circle, so I won't have to have one specific one with that. So that's one thing what I love with each of them, and I each tell them what they brought to the table, and I try to keep up with them on a regular basis, whether it be bi-weekly, monthly, or however it be. And so especially when the peak of the season, I try to not bug them too much, especially when they're busy. But they will straight up to me, look, if it's 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night and you really need an answer and stuff, I could. And if I had, then I will. And so I love that about all four of them. In fact, they check on me all the time and see how I'm doing. And so I appreciate what they've done for me, because at this point, especially 9 years in and making this drastic of a change, I definitely needed a lot of guidance with this decision. They've been very helpful with that.
So before we started recording, I mentioned it's kind of harder to interview someone that you've worked with day in, day out for 6 years. But
Right.
one area I really wanted you to share your story on was your college roommate and how that
Yeah.
experience impacted your athletic training career.
Yes. So for those listening, for the reference that she's talking about, I had a college roommate that I had. His name is Anthony Alvase. We were roommates for about a year when I was at my undergrad at UNCP. We became really close during that year. And unfortunately, around let's see, this would have been March of 2011. Unfortunately, he took his life, and it affected me for years, and sometimes to this day. And how that affected me going forward was, one, I felt very guilty about it because we were such good friends and roommates. And so when he eventually passed, I took a lot of blame for it because I was his friend. But when I went to his funeral, his family all told me how close he was to me, how I helped have a positive influence. I helped him make friends, and how much I had a good positive influence on him and things like that. They saw that he was real open about things because he was a hyper introvert. And as great as it was supposed to make me feel, I felt very guilty because I felt if he was this way, how come I couldn't see any signs that he had, or why would he do this to himself? And his father, he really reached out to me, especially because my father passed the very next year. So we helped kind of fill voids with each other, where I became like a surrogate son to me and became a surrogate father to myself. And so how it affected me going forward is that I became super sensitive to people with mental health, especially with my roommate, because I found out after he passed that he was dealing with a lot of mental health stuff that he would mention to me, but he kind of laid like a semi-suicide thing for himself on social media, and I recognized all the songs they put because they were his sad songs. And so anytime people that I knew, especially my athletes or any patient I have that goes through some type of mental health crisis, I will go out of my way to make sure that I look after them. And I took everything seriously, even if it means an intervention or having somebody that would need that, just any type of mental health training I could, I jumped on it because I always carried Anthony about that. And so I was really still super sensitive to the topic. In fact, for New Orleans, I actually signed up for the topic, let's talk about suicide, to honor Anthony because of that exact reason. And so I was real proud of myself for doing that. And it was, I even mentioned that to the people that I was intervention for, was that was exactly why I signed up for it. And I was really proud of how it turned out and listening to the topic, and just, it's just something that I'm still very proud to this day. And I hope he's still proud of me to this day for still carrying on his legacy. But he was someone that had a great effect on my life, and unfortunately ended the way it did. But it really helped change the way I look at things, and how people who go through that, they just sometimes they just need somebody just to listen and just pay attention. And that just, like I said, devastating, but something that still means the world to me. That over time, when I've had some positive outcomes with similar situations, to see that I can take what I've learned from that time back in 2011 to help have a more positive outcome was big for me. So even though it's a terrible thing to happen, I appreciate that, the fact that Anthony taught me a lot even through his death.
You mentioned the guilt that you experienced. What were some of the coping mechanisms, and what are some things you would have done differently?
Some copings were not that great, so I cried a lot. I cried a whole bunch. Luckily, at this time, my current wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, she was right there when it happened. And so one thing that the school let me do is that, because it was happening in my room, they allowed me to stay in a different room at night so I wouldn't have to sleep, because one of his habits was he would listen to certain songs all the time, and not having those songs play at night was, not helpful for me. So they allowed me to stay in a different room. Another thing that I did is that I spent a lot of time, because I'm a spiritual person, so I spent a lot of time reading the Bible. I really went back to my roots. So I was talking to my old minister a bit about how to cope with this kind of thing. I talked a lot with my mom, like I said, my girlfriend, my wife at the time, and stuff. And just let myself to really grieve, because I would try to hold it in to finish through school. And they would say it's not healthy to hold in those negative emotions. And so I would have random bursts of tears, especially anything that reminded me about him at the time. Another thing that was good to help me with it is that I really entrenched myself into my hobbies in a positive way. So you know me, I'm a big comic book nerd, and so I was really getting into a lot of the books that I read. Like MCU was so new at the time, and so I was looking into the movies, my old books, and things like that. I read. I really sunk myself into being at that time I was 23, so I was still being active, being an athlete and stuff. And so I would exercise for a bit. But a really good thing that I didn't tell a lot of people that I meditated. I would take some time, just make my room nice and quiet, have a little bit of ambient sound, and I would just be in my own center for 30 minutes. And whether it was a calm meditation that I had, or if I cried at the time, those kind of things really help me cope with it. And it's something I would kind of do to myself. I really feel myself getting to a dark space, that I would just pray and meditate at the same time, just let my mind wander, and then just come back for about 30 minutes. And it was something that I learned through my therapist at the time to really help cope with that. And so it was a really good strategy that I help use. And I still sometimes use it to this day.
I love that you mentioned therapy. A lot of
Hmm.
stigma around, especially ethnically diverse people in the
Yeah.
healthcare profession
Hmm.
seeking therapy. What would you say is the biggest benefit of being in therapy?
Ooh, I like that. So I would say the biggest thing with therapy I liked about it is that it really reintroduced me to myself into a way I never would have understood. So another one is a situation you're familiar. So me losing LeKevin, our football player from this past season, who got murdered after Thanksgiving. Super close to him, knew him since he was a freshman, helped him with his ACL surgery, got close to him, and he was like my little brother at the time. Last thing I spoke to him before he left, he was like, "Hey man, every you have to track."
Sorry, guys, there was a little technical difficulty. So we're picking this back up. So it seems a little discombobulated. That's just life. So,
Yep.
Chris, go ahead.
Okay, so again, for the audience, so talking about an experience with one of my former student athletes. So my student athlete, like Kevin, he passed away. Well, no, I'm not even gonna do that to him. He got murdered around Thanksgiving in last fall in November, and so I was super close to him. Known him since he was a freshman. I helped him with a lot of his injuries, so he was like a little brother to me. And after I found out he got killed, Before that, our AD, she contacted me the night before asking me for his information, which I didn't think much of it. She's my athletic director. But then I found out the news officially from one of my students a couple hours before a basketball game, and I was a mess. I was hysterical. I ran down the hallway. I was crying. I called my AD and asked her, like, is this why you contacted me? And she confirmed it. And I still try to work that basketball game, which I probably shouldn't. But like I told everyone at the time, I said I really didn't want to be alone with my thoughts and emotions. I felt my best therapy at the time was being with the kids because we were hosting our first home basketball tournament with it was an invitational. And I even told the visiting ATs at the time what happened to me. And they was like, do we need anything? I said, right now, I said, I just want to be there for y'all. And so I explained it to everyone else there. They made a big announcement at the game. And I let it loose after the game was over, just ran to my wife's arm and just cried. I just cried my eyes out. And the team, they won us. So I went to the locker room and celebrated with them. And I told them I'm probably going to take a day or two to just try to cope with it as best as I could. And let's see, that was on a Saturday. So that Monday, I contacted the school therapist, Miss Ratoya Mason, who's my rock, for everything. And thankfully, she just let me just be myself in there, and she let me just express exactly how I felt. And I'm not gonna lie to you, Janet, there was a few times I was screaming in that room. I just had to scream out his name, like, why did this have to happen? And she gave me a lot of good strategies to help cope with it and just understand you don't have to understand about it, which is true because it was senseless. And so the biggest plug for therapy like that, it was a big reintroduction to myself because again, I would have never thought some of this in a million years would have happened to someone like him or anyone I was super close to, because it was always one of my biggest fears is losing a student athlete, especially if I'm like trying to save them. So having that to read, find out how I am through some of my toughest times was to let myself know that it's okay, because for us, we're always the people that we rely on. Like we're always there for the people's worst times in their lives and stuff. And we're always that big rock and that standard. And so for the students to see me to not be at my best was a little bit jarring for them, but to also let them know that I was human too. And I had to let them know, I say, hey, like if this happened to any of you guys, even with someone as close as him, or I've only known you for a semester, I'm still gonna hurt. And they just let them know for them that I will love each and every one of them. And so it was a good and a terrible way to confirm to the students that I truly did love all 386 of them, no matter what happened. And so it was a great way to help get with that. And I appreciate Miss Ratoya. Shout out for her. Shout out for TL for letting me do it. Shout out for my wife for being my pseudo therapist at the time, and everyone else that I had. Like it was even you, because you reached out to me the day it happened. And so just for you for keeping in touch and paying attention. So I appreciate all those who really took the time to help me go through it, because I still wear his bracelet that we had from his walk that we have. I still carry it with me every day, and just as a constant reminder that Eight Ball's not here, and I still love that kid, man. Rest in peace to you.
So, how did you balance your needs and the needs of your student athletes after a tragedy like that?
Ooh, great question. Um, that's a thing that was a good balancing act. And so one was just letting people know that I wasn't okay and that I was allowing myself to have bad days in front of them. But at the same time, I kind of gave myself a limit to how much I'd express how much I was having a bad day. Because at the end of the day, I still had a job to do, but I was just honest with my emotions. So one, I remember the Tuesday I came back from my little sabbatical that I had. People asked how was I, and I said I'm not great at all, but we still got a basketball game going on this week, and we're going to travel. So I just poured all my attention into them, but I allowed myself some time to where if I need to disappear into my office or whatever, I'll just say, just give me a minute or two, or sometimes it'll take 10 to 15 to just kind of just be to myself. And at times I would just step outside or make a phone call to my wife or whoever that I would listen to me. Just, I'm not all right, but I'm giving myself the time that I need. And people would just encourage me to take more time than I need, but I didn't want to take too much because knowing for myself, the more I thought about it, the sadder I was going to be. So I needed to keep filling myself with positive influences and memories of him. So, and I tell the kids all the time, they were always my why. And so seeing them happy, sad, dead tired from running sprints, but their Coach Wallace calling them stuff I'm not going to repeat online and stuff. Shout out Coach Wallace. Just stuff like that, like really perked me up and just made me say, hey, these kids, these people here are what I need right now. And this reminder of why I go to do what I do. And so even in my current setting, I would like to still have that type of impact with my associates and stuff. Is just to let them know that I'm going to care about them no matter what happens. And so And then, like I said, going to his memorial, because I couldn't attend his funeral because we had work that day. So I made sure to express myself to his family. And even though I was looking for it, just the positive responses I got from kids and from his parents and stuff. In fact, you remember Naja from the volleyball team? She came up to me. She said, "Chris, you had no idea how much you had me cry out there. Man, I'm looking up to you like that." I said, "That wasn't my intention, but I appreciate that." And then even I think Dr. Baxter and Dr. Ernstberger and stuff, people just were talking about my speech. They're still telling me they're talking about that speech. And I was like 6 7 months ago. So I wasn't out there trying to make a big dramatic speech, but just to let him know, because I couldn't be there at the funeral, that how much he meant to me and that everyone else needed to hear that. So just allowing myself to really be more vulnerable than I would have been in the past. Like, hey, they need to see that I'm not going to always be okay. And it's all right. It's like I would tell the kids that you don't always have to be Superman. Sometimes you can be Clark Kent. And I allowed myself to be their Clark Kent for a couple of days.
So, last question, and it's always my favorite question for the living room talks. What is your most embarrassing athletic training moment, and what did you learn from it?
I actually have two, but one of them I'm not really too embarrassed about. One, this was recent, so this would have been last spring during baseball season. I think we were playing NC Wesleyan at the time, and so this is the typical in between innings. I'm going out to jog into the umpires to give them their water, and I give them their water, and I'm trying to sprint back before they get ready to start the next inning. And somehow I step on the third base plate, and I end up tripping, going to the dugout, and I sprained my ankle pretty bad to where I'm limping to the visiting dugout. And people say, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I ain't gonna lie, I think I really messed myself up at this time." And so I'm in there doing ankle pumps, I'm doing my ABCs, I'm using TheraBand I had in my kid at the time. I'm doing my own rehab in between innings, and that thing is swelling up like a junk. And so I'm really limping going out. I start off as a nice little sprint by the fourth inning. By the time I get to the seventh, I have a little giddy up going about to it to where I couldn't even hide it anymore. I was like, yeah, I'm in a lot of pain. So I'm going through all my Ipren and it was bad, but I had a good laugh about it. And then my second one is actually, I'm kind of proud of this one. So this would have been around 2019, 2020 with soccer, playing Piedmont, long game. And with soccer, we hate Piedmont. And so we go to overtime, and Blake Webb, our midfielder, he makes a nice 40-yard strike to win the game in overtime. And for a good 20 seconds, I forget I'm in AT. I'm out there celebrating with them in the pile. I'm jumping with them. I'm yelling and screaming and stuff like that. I'm a fan for 20 seconds, and they have it on camera. I think Coach Dixon still has it. And even though it should have been an embarrassing thing, but the kids love, they still talked about it even at graduation this passing. Said, "Chris, man, you remember that time?" I said, "Yeah, I just lost it. Like, I was just right there with you. I was just a fan. I did not care at the time, but afterward, I said, yeah, that probably wasn't the most professional thing in the world. You'd have thought we won a natty at the time, but I was just having fun. I was just with the kids, and that stuff like that just helped me build rapport with them. But those are my two most embarrassing. One is truly embarrassing. The other one I'm actually kind of proud of, but in a different way. It's not the most professional thing, but I still love that moment.
Chris, thank you so much for doing this with me. I know we're going to talk pretty soon. So, for the audience, thank you so much for listening in and have a good night. Bye.
Thank you. Appreciate it.